Okay, so on the topic of power chords, like I said, the top three notes of your classic major and minor bar chords, whether they're an A string or a fifth string bar chord, or an E string or a sixth string bar chord, they all share these three notes the same: the root, the fifth, and the octave, which is the root note an octave higher. So the reason I always got my students to learn power chords first is because this is an awkward shape, and one of the hardest parts about bar chords is keeping this weird claw shape together. So if you get used to power chords, it gives you an anchor point. And what I mean by anchor point is if you're playing an A minor chord and you want to switch to a C, there's no point in coming off the whole guitar and then trying to jam on every string, every fret for the C chord. The better way to do that is to say, well, I can conserve my momentum, or my movement actually, and this note, first string note, and this note are going to be the same in the C chord. So I just have to move this finger up there. And it's easier for me to take one finger and find a position in relation to fingers that are already down than to find a position in relation to space. It's like changing from a G to a D. I keep this finger on. Having this finger on gives me an anchor point, and then I can surround it with these two fingers. So, and then if I go back to the G, this pinky comes on right underneath, and then I reach up, and that was a C add 9, I screwed that up, but you reach up and you grab the G. So having an anchor point is really important, and learning your power chords gives you anchor points for what will ultimately become your bar chords. So it's just a way to get used to this shape moving around the fretboard over and over and over again. And some of the ways I've taught my students or pushed my students to practice would be just to take that shape and run it up the neck of the guitar. Start with two fingers, just the root note and the fifth. Get as close to the fret as possible without going over for both fingers. That'll give you a clearer sound. You might have to move this one back slightly if you are going to stick your pinky in there. And get used to that shape moving around. Skip two frets, move up the dots on your fretboard, and then start to alternate between the E string version and the A string version. Now the A string version has its own little tweak that I always told my students to watch out for, and that's that normally you don't want the open E or the sixth string to be droning on while you're playing A string bar chords. Sometimes you do, a lot of times you don't. And if you don't want that, the best way to cancel it out is to have the tip of your first finger ride underneath the string. So if you play a note on the A string and then play the E string above it, if you're holding it properly, you won't get a sound. Well, you might get a little harmonic, but you won't really get a sound out of that E string. So I can hit the top half of the strings, and I'm only getting that one note, instead of having this string drone the whole way through. So with the A string power chords and bar chords, it's really good practice to walk up and get used to feeling the E string run across the tip of your finger, and being able to mute that with the tip of your finger will help your bar chords not sound nearly as muddy. If you were to hit, say, like a D sharp minor bar chord, you don't want that E on top. It sounds very awkward. You want to be able to mute that with the tip of that finger. But again, I would start with power chords and just get used to this. This is an inherently weird position to have your hand in. Unless you're kind of putting on surgical gloves all the time, you never really hold your hand like this. So it's tough, and you probably, the muscles required to really press all the strings down aren't really developed yet. So starting with the power chords is a good way to get used to the shape. And then once you're used to the shape, you kind of add on to it. Maybe add on the middle finger for your major chords on the E string, and your minor chords on the A string. So start adding in that middle finger. And then start pushing that finger down as hard as you can to get all the strings to ring out. And on that topic, I always told my students, make sure when you're playing a bar chord, I know a lot of times you can get used to throwing your thumb up there, and that can be a good way of playing sort of the Hendrix style chords where you actually fret a note with your thumb. and it leaves your pinky free to embellish. But for now, you're going to want to stay away from that, especially in bar chords. So you need to hold the guitar and create this kind of pocket down here between your thumb and first finger, and that pocket will allow you to really press against the guitar with your first finger and your thumb. If your thumb's up here, your first finger is not going to get flat enough to really press against all of the strings. So keep your thumb down, create this pocket. The next thing is, I'm just going to hold a bar chord here for a second and then show you my finger. So if you look at it, I'm not holding my finger flat against the guitar. I'm actually holding at this weird kind of a circular, semicircular angle kind of thing. And I'm not pressing it with the pad of my finger. If you look, I don't know if you can see it here. See where the strings come across? They don't come across on the pad of my finger. They don't come across on the side of the finger. They come across in almost this 3/4 spot. So they're running across this part of my finger. And that's how you get some really good pressure against the strings. Doing it like this is really awkward. It forces your arm out. Having it like this allows you to keep your arm out a little bit more comfortable. And I just find that it helps press against the strings better. So create the pocket, keep the finger a little bit arched, and kind of use the 3/4 side or the quarter side, not flat, not the full side, but somewhere in between. And that's usually what's good for keeping that pressure on. Now, as for practicing power chords, I would say, you can run up the guitar, but that's maybe not super exciting. So there are a couple songs I would always give my students to kind of make it a little bit more exciting to play power chords while practicing power chords. One such song is a song from mid-90s, I think. It's a Stone Temple Pilots song. I was a big Stone Temple Pilots fan, still am. And they use power chords in kind of an interesting way in a song called Big Bang Baby, where they run through a power chord riff. And it goes, you can look up the tabs for it, but so it's using both strings and is moving pretty quick. And it gives you kind of that up and down and side to side practice at a pretty quick tempo. So that's a fun one to learn. I think American Idiot by Green Day, can't remember how it goes. That's another one that runs up and down, and it's a little bit more exciting than just. So gives you a couple kind of more well-known songs that you can play along with. That takes care of your metronome issue and practice. And the other thing is, as you're starting to get used to the bar chords, power chords can be subbed in. They're not going to sound like the bar chord, but they can do in a pinch, especially in like a rock song where you have a lot of distortion to fill up the sound and kind of mask the strings that you're missing. I think so. An example would be like Stairway to Heaven. When it gets into the hard part or the heavier part, it's an A minor to a G to an F, and I think he plays full bar chords. I think he plays over and over again. But if you played it with just the power chords, there's no obvious difference, but you can still kind of fake your way through a few songs and feel good about it, because half the fun of guitar playing is being able to play. So if you can use a power chord to fake a bar chord for now, it could go along with it to helping your confidence, just keeping you playing while you practice those bar chords, because you'll never get away from bar chords. They'll come back to haunt you. And there are ways you can kind of cheat them, but I think learning them the proper way is important. So maybe start with the power chords, then you use the power chords as once you're used to this shape, that becomes your anchor point for whatever bar chord you're trying to switch into. So anchor point, anchor point, anchor point, add the rest of the bar chord. Anyways, I'm up 30 seconds out of my 10 minutes here, so hopefully that helps. Take any suggestions, don't take any of them, I won't be hurt. And if anyone has any other suggestions, please. This is not the only way to go about learning bar chords, but it's a way that seemed to work for a bunch of my students. So feel free to leave me any notes or ask me any questions if you would like. Thanks. Good luck.